Welcome back to the marketplace. This is where all your free agency news drops, analysis, everything that's coming after free agency began on Friday, and we spoke about it, the dominoes that were going to fall, how quickly they were going to occur, and Olgun joining me today because they have fallen. Matthew Dellavedova, the big one to kick things off. Olgun, welcome. Multi-year deal to the Sydney Kings. Talk to us about how it all came about.
Yeah, so Pete, Delly obviously did that round trip of Australia. He started in Perth, went to Sydney, then Brisbane, and obviously United had that offer on the table as well. But it was the Sydney Kings with the amount of sort of firepower they can bring to the table. Brian Goorjian, Luke Longley, Andrew Bogut, Chris Pongrass, even going up to the owner, Robin Denham. They just had so many voices in the room that could relate to Matthew Dellavedova and convince him to head to the Harbour City. Now we have almost a collaboration of a ton of Boomers legends coming together, and Matthew Dellavedova, the reigning championship series MVP, four-time Olympian, he heads to the Sydney Kings, and they have another marquee level player to add to the marquees that already existed there in Xavier Cooks and Bull Kuol. They're putting together a really interesting, almost United type local heavy team.
We'll talk about what this means for the Kings because, as you said, it is a really nice fit on paper, especially with what Brian Goorjian spoke about in his press conferences last year, wanting that key point guard piece to build around the rest of the team. But in terms of the teams that missed out, is there any inkling, do we get any sort of whispers what it came down to? Was it between the Sydney Kings and return to Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane? Was Perth a real legitimate shot? We know that he was enjoying his time in Melbourne family-wise, would have been a big pickup to move across. Was there any sort of whispers about the last two it came down to?
So let's go through team by team. United was one that felt pretty early in the piece that they weren't going to retain him. They never really felt like they had the offer on the table from both a money and years and also a role perspective that Delhi would go to. So they felt, I think, from really early in the piece that it wasn't going to be them. And then you had the Perth Wildcats, who were under the impression that it was between them and Sydney. And that's what the feeling was throughout the week. And the Perth Wildcats, they had multiple meetings with Delhi. They had a meeting that had Jesse Wagstaff involved. And then obviously Mark Arena, John Reilly, Danny Mills. The big hitters were also involved in a lot of those meetings. And then obviously the Sydney Kings got him. The Brisbane Bullets were under the impression that they were very close to getting Dellavedova's signature. They had a meeting with him on Thursday morning. During the weekend, they presented the new head coach, Stu Lash, and they felt as though they were really close to getting him. But ultimately, you look at who Dellavedova is, someone who is extremely intense from an attention to detail perspective, and he went through every nitty-gritty part of these franchises in the discussions he had, and ultimately it was the Sydney Kings that ticked the most boxes, and obviously the idea of a reunion, not just with Brian Goorjian, his former Australian Boomers head coach, but also Andrew Bogut, a longtime teammate of his with the Boomers, who was an assistant coach with the Sydney Kings. The Sydney Kings just ticked a lot of boxes from day one, and they nailed their pitch to him.
We did say that at the end of Marketplace Live when Jack Heverin asked us where we thought Matthew Dellavedova would end up. And we all said the Sydney Kings for a majority of reasons. And yes, the 3-year deal is the key thing. Wanting to get there for the LA Olympics to continue to play at the high level he is. We know he's the utmost professional, but it's also just seemed exactly the kind of piece that Brian Goorjian now wants to build the rest of the team around to get back to the Sydney Kings that are competing for championships. We know they had a down season last year. But with this locked in, you mentioned the other marquees, obviously Xavier Cooks, Bull Kuol. What does it mean the rest of their starting five in particular is going to look like? Because they are three major pieces to build around. Are they looking, is Jalen Adams still on the cards? What are we looking at here from a Sydney Kings perspective?
Yeah, so Pete, you mentioned it, and I was in a lot of those press conferences when Brian Goorjian would say, I just need a point guard. And so he was hungry for a ball carrier, and now they have probably the best local ball carrier on the market. So that's their point guard ticked off. What they're looking for now is someone to put next to him. So they will go and search for a combo guard of some sort to put next to Matthew Dellavedova in that starting lineup, and that will be an import. Now, when you look at Dellavedova, an import guard, and then Bull Kuol and Xavier Cooks, right there you have theoretically your combined 4 marquees and imports. But the Kings do have a desire to go and search for a big man, and so it wouldn't surprise me if one of, I assume, Bull Kuol or Dellavedova isn't marqueed for the entire season, and they can have an import big man who they bring in. And that is something that this team has been sort of signaling over the past couple of weeks, that they will go and search the import market for a big. So when you look at the starting lineup, they or at least that roster, they fill a lot of the needs that they were lacking last season, which is an elite ball carrier and a big man, just to give them some sort of depth in that position.
It does, and again, everything that he brings on court, I think, he has to be compared to the same of everything he does off court, culture-wise, the professionalism. I think this is a really good signing for the Sydney Kings, knowing that Delhi would have brought that to either the Perth Wildcats as well, the Brisbane Bullets. So I do want to ask you this, because we spoke about it on Marketplace Live as well. You probably brought it up more so. What team does this hurt most not getting Matthew Dellavedova's signature? Because we spoke about the need for a marquee at the Perth Wildcats, but also I heard similar things. I thought the Brisbane Bullets were very confident that they could try and bring him up there, and we also spoke about what that could mean for their future. Who does this hurt the most?
The easy answer is the Perth Wildcats. Because if you go through the other teams involved, you look at Melbourne United, they have Chris Goulding. There is a ton of interest in a reunion with Shea Ely. They have the ability to go and get these marquee players. You look at the Brisbane Bullets, they have Tyrell Harrison. They have Mitch Norton. If they're not marquee players, they're almost there, or they're really high-level Australians. The Perth Wildcats, as it currently stands, don't have any of those proven high-level Australians or New Zealanders locked in. And so without a marquee like Matthew Dellavedova, and unless they can go and swing for a Will McDowell-White or a Joe Luala Jr., then they're in a really precarious spot when it comes to filling out their roster around imports. You have trust that the Wildcats are going to spend enough money to go and get high-level imports. That's not a question. But it's surrounding them with high-level locals. And when you look at, one, the marquees left on the table, who it doesn't sound like a ton of them will be returning, and two, who's remaining on the free agent list, just as far as players you can fill out a roster with from a role player perspective, that there's just not a ton of talent. And so it's difficult to see how the Wildcats, who have a lot of roster spots to fill, are going to fill those spots with high quality enough players to get back to a semi-final series.
It's going to be a fascinating watch from a Wildcats perspective, but that's about it for Matthew Dellavedova on this segment of the Marketplace, because I do think it's the right fit. We spoke about what he can bring. I'm really excited to see an off-ball guard who's going to be a real high, prolific scorer. Whether that's a Jalen Adams type, but again, just going back to Gorgin's press conferences over and over, wanting to get Jalen Adams off the ball. If they bring in that high-level scorer as a combo guard with Bull Qual, Xavier Cooks, a big man as well, all of a sudden this team, I don't want to go early saying contending for a championship, because I refuse to walk to Perth, like Derek Rucker said, but they've got the really good start because he was the biggest piece in free agency. The next one, Flynn Cameron, we spoke about that was going to be a major piece to fall. Again, happened very quickly as free agency opened. You're reporting a multi-year deal to the Adelaide 36ers. Shocked a lot of people from the New Zealand fan base. How did this one come about?
Yeah, so Pete, this is one that you and I spoke about on that Marketplace Live, and we spoke about these two teams specifically, the Adelaide 36ers and the New Zealand Breakers. The Breakers obviously wanted to bring him home, but the 36ers just had an offer that was very difficult for Flynn Cameron to refuse. From obviously a money perspective, that they came to the table, but from a role perspective, it sounds like they're willing to start the season with Flynn Cameron effectively stepping into that Sunday Dech or Lat Mayen role as the starting three. And it's effectively his spot to lose at that point. They see him as someone who can be a 3-and-D guy and also offer a lot of ball carrying duties as well. So they bring him in, and it's basically, we're going to prioritize you. We're going to give you an expanded role relative to what you had in the past, and we're going to give you a role that other teams are not willing to give you. And it's not just for this season, but they've signed him to a 3-year deal, a straight 3 years. So they have Flynn Cameron through to his 27th, 28th birthday. So they like the idea of Flynn Cameron coming in now, continuing his development, and by hopefully year 2 or 3 of this deal, can he turn into a high-level local player in the NBL? A lot of teams around the league, there's a reason why I'm told 5 teams in a 10-team league were interested in him. They see the potential in him. The 36ers were the ones who came to the table.
I don't want to say it's a bigger signing than Matthew Dellavedova, because obviously he was the key piece. He just won a Championship Series MVP. But for a 22-year-old Flynn Cameron, who felt like a caged dog at times at Melbourne United, behind the experience of Delly, CG, Ian Clark, and Shea Ely, we're going to see what he's fully capable of now for that 3-year deal in Adelaide. But from a New Zealand perspective especially, it looked like everybody wanted to get him back home. The Breakers' new ownership came out and said, we want to bring back key locals. And fans, it's easy to say now, that's a big miss. How do you fumble that? But you're talking about what the offer was on the table. Are we talking financially it was more beneficial for an Adelaide, or is it more of what could the role have been to get him the opportunity to showcase that he is one of the best local talents we have in the league?
From what I understand, it was everything. Every box that needed to be ticked was ticked by the Adelaide 36ers. And I agree. I wouldn't say this is a bigger signing than Matthew Dellavedova, but there is a possibility that in a year or two we can look back at this signing and think, wow, like what a get from the 36ers. We'll see what he turns into, and if he turns into a high level player, then it'll look like a masterstroke from the 36ers, being willing to put forward an offer that Flynn Cameron couldn't refuse. And it wasn't just the offer on the table; it was Mike Wells, the head coach of the 36ers, flying to Auckland to go and visit with Flynn Cameron. So it was they clearly put a lot of effort and time into recruiting him, and I think that did speak volumes. From a New Zealand perspective, obviously the prospect of him going home would have been terrific, and it did come down to New Zealand and Adelaide. But again, as romantic as it is for someone to want to go home, that person has to think about his or her future, and in this case, the future in Adelaide, it seems like the expanded role and the offer on the table was just one that Cameron just saw as way more palatable.
I'm very interested to see how it plays out from his role perspective. As you said, it sounds like that kind of starting three spot with the Sunday Dech, Lat Mayan type role is what he's going to look forward to in Adelaide 36ers. We only really saw him as a ball handler, maybe off the ball a couple of times for Melbourne United. I'm interested to see how that all works out. But I think, as you said on Friday in the marketplace, the key is if you can just get him in the door, whatever it takes to get Flynn Cameron in the door for a multi-year deal, you work with him from that. We've seen the likes of Trey Kell come in as an off guard, end up being a point guard. So once he's in the door, that all might change depending on what the Adelaide 36ers end up putting on the floor. So let's talk about the rest of their makeup then. It's pretty clear then from this, they're going to go after a high-level point guard. Kendrick Davis, we look like that window's kind of shut, and then a high-level four-man. And all of a sudden, that starting five looks pretty good shaping ahead of NBL 26.
Yeah, so import one, DJ Vasiljevic, Flynn Cameron, import four, Isaac Humphries. That is a formidable starting five. And again, their success relies on the development of Flynn Cameron and then the level of those imports. And I keep being told that, priority 1, 2, and 3 for those imports is high character. Again, it's something we've spoken about ad nauseum over the past few seasons of what this 36ers team needs, and they bring in someone like Flynn Cameron, who is a high character guy coming from Melbourne United. They bring in Isaac White, a Stanford grad, a high character guy in the NBL. So they are trying to sort of pivot into being a team that a lot of guys want to come to, and they are striking early on a lot of these signings, and they want to improve the chemistry and the makeup and just the general health of that team. And so that's the priority. And so you look at the import they'll bring in and the import four they'll bring in particular, they want someone who can push the pace and really stretch the floor. They like the idea of having a ton of ball carriers, which is why, the starting three man they'll have in Flynn Cameron is someone who can carry the ball. Isaac White off the bench can carry the ball. That's what they want this team to look like. This will be more of a Mike Wells team, whereas last season they brought Montrezl Harrell in the last minute, and it turned into sort of a team by necessity. That's how they had to play. This will have a lot of Mike Wells' fingerprints, and the thing I keep hearing is assistant coach Marko Marinovic is someone with a strong developmental background, and so they trust that he can play a significant role, especially in the development of Flynn Cameron.
It's a huge signing, and as we said off to start to talk about this topic, I think it will end up being probably one of the most dynamic signings in the offseason from a local perspective for sure. And time will tell. We'll find out as NBL 26 starts. But Olgun, they were the two main pieces, and they're done early in free agency. There's going to be a lot of other local movement. Imports might come a little later towards Summer League. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks. But Melbourne United have now lost Flynn Cameron and Matthew Dellavedova, two key pieces. They're looking a little bare from a depth chart perspective. Are you hearing anything else about who they're after?
Yeah, so one name you didn't mention is Jack White, who they obviously lost to that player option, and he's currently in Bayern Munich, and he will be gauging his overseas options, right? And so they have this spot they need to fill, this starting four spot. And one name I'm told they've reached out to and have strong interest in and is a high priority for them is Finn Delany. Obviously out of New Zealand, high-level power forward in this league, has been playing his trade in Europe, currently in Japan, and he is someone who United has made a high priority this free agency. And it's interesting, every time I hear Finn Delany's name in an NBL free agency over the past couple of seasons, it's a team is interested, but he is always flagging that he'd like to stay in Europe. He really enjoys his time there. It wasn't a no. He hasn't said that, no, I'm not interested in this. And to me, that's notable. So this is something that I think he's kept the door open to. So he is someone who United is chasing very hard. If they can bring him in and effectively have him replace Jack White, who replaced Luke Travers before him, Finn Delany ticks a lot of the boxes that Dean Vickerman looks for in that starting power forward spot. So he is someone who they're chasing very, very hard.
And he has a relationship with Dean Vickerman as well. That's something you talk about. There wasn't a no, and they're going to continue to listen. That seems like a big reason why the Finn Delany is open to a potential return to the NBL. But I tell you what, from a New Zealand perspective, if Finn Delany signs with Melbourne United, Flynn Cameron goes to Adelaide, all of a sudden this talk about bringing key locals home is going to sting fans. On the New Zealand Breakers, we've heard the ownership come out and say that over and over, time and time again now. We're getting back to the roots. We're getting back to those glory days. They won 4 championships in 5 years, what they managed to achieve. Is there any local talent that looks like they're going to be able to land ahead of NBL 26?
Yeah, so I'm told that Izayah Le'Afa has agreed to a deal with the Breakers. Now, this is a 2-year deal with the New Zealand Breakers, obviously a Kiwi. He's the first sort of Kiwi signing for the Breakers this offseason. So that's a great thing. They obviously missed out on Flynn Cameron. But Le'Afa is someone who's coming off a down year with the Sydney Kings. Both parties declined that mutual option, and I think they want him to get back to the days that he was with the New Zealand Breakers when he played a key role in their championship series run. Before that, he hasn't had a great shooting season since his first season with the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, and so I think they believe that he can get back to that and he can be that sort of 3-and-D high level defender. This is someone who, when you look at the free agent market, the talent is slowly thinning out as guys slowly agree to deals. And Izayah Le'Afa was one of the best available from a guard perspective, especially one of those combo guards. So he'll head home to New Zealand where he was a couple seasons ago.
Big signing, you're right. I know he had a down year for the Sydney Kings, but I really do think heading back home, heading back to being in New Zealand where he had some success, the type of play style that we saw last year under Petteri Koponen, I really think he'll be able to get back to his best. And that's a good key piece then for New Zealand Breakers fans, to have him locked away for 2 years, to continue to build. It's also probably unfair for me to say they've missed out on a key thing. Just because you've said you wanted local talent doesn't mean you're going to get everybody in the first year under the new ownership. It's a good starting block for them to build off going forward. Do you have any other signings for us before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, so I flagged on our Marketplace Live a couple teams interested in Nick Marshall. And right now it's sounding like there's an agreement with the Tasmania Jack Jumpers on a 2-year deal. Now, you sort of look at the roster, Clint Steindl out via retirement. Nick Marshall is someone who can sort of slot into maybe not the exact same role, because Steindl was a really important piece. He was their captain, but he is someone who the Jack Jumpers have liked for a really long time, and they were really keen to get a deal done. And this is a 2-year deal for Nick Marshall, and just a change of scenery for someone like him. He's a big guard. There are clearly some scoring chops. There's clearly an athletic base there as well. This is a really good opportunity under a high-quality head coach in Scott Roth in a really structured, organized program to really see what he can do. And I think this will be Nick Marshall's best chance to really develop into the thing that a lot of people around the league want him to become. And it's a 2-year deal, so he'll be headed to Tasmania.
That's a big signing, because we did speak about that last week, about the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix were interested, some other teams around the league interested in Nick Marshall. But do you think the enticing side of seeing other guys go down to Tasmania and look for a new chance, a change of scenery, is what probably got him over the line? I talk of Jack McVeigh. I know he's probably not to the level of Jack McVeigh yet, but Jack McVeigh came from the Adelaide 36ers, limited opportunity, and then flourished in the system, not just on court, but everything about the Tasmania Jack Jumpers. Sean McDonald has broken out. Anthony Drimmick's found his feet. A lot of guys have gone to Tasmania under Scott Roth, and they've just found a different level. It seems like this is going to be a perfect fit for Nick Marshall to do that, who's had his ups and downs, but you can't say probably that he hasn't had an opportunity, because he did have an opportunity at Adelaide, probably just didn't take it to his best ability.
Yeah, you look at the Jack Jumpers and just how they have operated over the past few seasons. And again, it's just structured. It's very organized. They're a really professional outfit just from the way their processes operate. And so you look at a player with potential entering that system. It was the thing that we wanted to see, for example, from Roman Cialipa when he signed there. Can this person thrive in the Jack Jumpers culture? Because that's a very real thing. And we've seen the development of Jack McVeigh. We've seen the development of even Will Magnay, Sean McDonald. So we've seen these guys develop in this structure. And I think it's just a really good environment for, high potential guys to get closer to their ceiling. And especially coming from the 36ers teams of years past. It just, the environment just wasn't conducive to someone really developing to the best of their abilities, just because of some of the off-court stuff that always happens and things like that. And obviously the 36ers are working really actively to change that. And so far it looks like they're definitely headed in the right direction. And Mike Wells is part of the people who are leading that. But the Jack Jumpers, they had an awesome culture from day one.
And so if you're someone with high potential, going to the Jack Jumpers is probably a really good place to be.
Exciting times for the Jack Jumpers. So there we go. Some free agent moves already beginning. Free agency has just started, but we've started to see the moves already. I've got my voicemails are starting to load up, which means that your phone's going off the hook, mate. So thank you for joining me. I've got a feeling we'll be chatting very soon this week. Hope your phone's not going too crazy.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Thank you, everybody. This has been the NBL Marketplace. All your free agent moves, stops, analysis. I reckon we'll be coming to you very shortly in the next couple of days. Stay tuned.